You'll have opportunities to succeed and you'll have opportunities to fail, and get really comfortable failing. Just get comfortable falling on your face, because what I learned in Nashville is, um,
Do you want to be a professional musician? Then this video is for you. I've been sitting down with some of my friends who are pro musicians, and we've been talking about what it takes to make it as a pro and how to be successful in the music business. My name is Keith, and this is Common Sense Musician. I've been making a series of videos that talks about what it's like to be a professional musician, and hopefully will help you decide if that's a career you want to pursue. If you missed that first video, click this link right here. And if you missed the first interview video with professional bassist Ryan Tilby, click this link. Recently, I sat down with my friend Drew Williams, a country and bluegrass artist who spent over a decade working in Nashville, and he shared with me some of his most valuable lessons. If you need the TLDR, click the chapter headings in the description below. But otherwise, I think you'll find the most value if you watch the interview in its entirety. Be sure to stick around to the end, and he drops some absolute truth bombs. Trust me on this one, you're going to want to follow Drew on Instagram and Spotify, and those links are in the description too. Let's get to it. All right, I'm here today with Drew Williams, who is a former Nashville artist and now a high school principal working at a charter high school for the performing arts. So he's seen a lot of angles of the music business. How you doing today, Drew?
man, fantastic. Thanks for having me on, Keith.
Man, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
I, let me start here, if that's all right. So I actually grew up in a clogging and bluegrass family in the Bay Area. Gal, by the time I graduated high school, I had about 5,000 hours of rehearsal or performances,
Wow.
and a lot of that happened actually in the streets of San Francisco, busking, which is interesting, right? Because we did that as a family to kind of make ends meet, to pay rent, to put food on the table, and so it was one of those interesting things for me where it was kind of a livelihood, a life or death kind of a situation. And so we got real good at navigating crowds and like understanding, okay, how do we draw a crowd in? And I played fiddle. We learned real fast that Devil Went Down to Georgia got us more tips. Orange Blossom Special got us more tips than some other songs, and so we kind of learned, oh, what the audience wants matters in some context of the business, in at least the music business side of things. So I studied jazz violin, and so that kind of improv world really was my jam. My teacher in San Francisco was an incredible artist himself, working musician Jim Hurley, who has continually been a mentor to me. And so I feel super lucky that I was taught by a professional musician, working, gigging musician. And I didn't realize at the time, but he was instilling these kind of rules for me to follow as I kind of followed my path in the musician world. I didn't necessarily, I wanted to be an orthodontist, Keith, which is so funny because I cannot imagine putting my hands in people's mouths at this point. But um, I went to college because they had a bluegrass program, and so it was there that I mean, that's where I met my wife. She's a phenomenal fiddle player, keyboard player, singer songwriter, and we toured. I toured with a college group. I toured with my own band all over the world, and loved it. It definitely made college a longer process for me, but it was a pretty incredible experience, and I played with a lot of really amazing people who became lifelong friends and mentors kind of throughout the whole process of my music journey. So when my wife Lacey and I got married, we moved to Nashville. We were like, let's go, let's do the Nashville thing, and had stars in our eyes for sure. And wow, like we got there and it was a very quick taste of the real world. And I mean, at the time I was probably playing, before we moved to Nashville, I was probably playing about 100 shows a year. So playing a lot, and from country to jazz to folk, to bluegrass. And we got to Nashville, and and kind of the gig stopped, right? People wouldn't really kind of give us the time or day, because we hadn't lived there that long. So we kind of had to legitimize ourselves and play, some gigs. So I went to a lot of jams, where then people would say, "Oh, can I get your number? If I need a sub, can I give them your number to sub for me?" And that's how I started getting gigs, is I started subbing for people.
So how long were you in Nashville?
So we were there for a decade, 2006 to 2016, and love it. Call it home still. Our three kids were born in Nashville. Yeah, miss, we moved but for work, but yeah, miss it. Learned a lot there for sure.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I want to get into is what makes that Nashville scene so unique. I mean, is it just the sheer mass of people trying to do the job, do the gig?
I mean, obviously, I'm just speaking from my own perspective, right? Like that, I think is important, just as a caveat. The energy at that point in that time, I know a lot of things have changed in Nashville since we lived there. But during that decade, I mean, it was a big time of change. I mean, clubs that had been there for a long time were disappearing. New clubs were coming in. You had the huge bro country thing happening. Um, Interestingly enough, fiddle kind of fell away while we were there. I ended up playing a lot of mandolin and a lot of guitar, a lot of acoustic guitar, probably more than fiddle, even though fiddle was kind of my main axe. Sometimes I had to force myself to just go out and meet people and go to the venues and work, try to work the kind of the crowd a little bit to get gigs. Eventually, probably around 3 years in, 2 to 3 years in, then I was working on a master's degree and a PhD, and so I kind of became this kind of call when people went on tour. Then I got a lot of gigs in town, because they were on tour, and so I didn't realize that was a thing until I was like, oh, I can be the utility player that kind of can take all the local gigs, when other people are on tour. I didn't see that coming, but and then I did a lot of session work, which was also pretty cool.
So I visited Nashville. We've talked about this, but I was there for like a week.
Uh-huh.
I remember talking to a guy in a drum shop and just saying, "Man, this is so great, and there's so many musicians here, and there's so many venues." I'm like, hypothetically, if I moved here, what would it take to break into the scene? And he's like, "Well, first you got to be really good." He says, "But if you move to like LA or Atlanta, 4 to 5 years," he goes, "Nashville, it'll be 10."
Wow.
Because I asked him at the time, I said, "How many drummers lived here?" And it was a longer conversation, but he said, "Yeah, there's 30,000 drummers in the streets in Nashville." He's like, "Good luck, bro."
Ah, 30,000. Holy smokes.
Yeah, it was insane. And we were there in 2022,
Okay.
a couple of years post COVID, and the guy said that there was a time, during COVID, it was the thing where you could kind of move and work anywhere. And
Yeah.
so he said there were sometimes 1,000 people a day moving to Nashville.
Oh my gosh.
These guys are aspiring artists and producers and recording engineers.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was awesome. The energy in Nashville is just amazing. It was cool. It was hard not to get wrapped up into it.
We kind of were told when we moved, and you kind of had to be there about 3 years. A lot of people moved there, and Lace and I were in the same boat. Like, we moved there, and it was tough. You go from playing 100 gigs a year and making really good money doing it, and by really good money, I mean, barely pay rent. But, and to Nashville, I mean, Nashville didn't pay as well, from where I was at, and it was tough work, like I was playing a lot of country gigs, and so they would send charts, and then I'd have to show up the next day and just play the whole set right down, and a lot of times they want the lead fiddle part or the break to be the same that it is on the record, because the crowd knows that break. And so that was a hard transition for me, from like being able to improvise and put my kind of touch on it or my feel on a song, to like having artists, say, "Oh, no, 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 you have to play it exactly like the record." um
Yeah.
so here's an interesting story. When I got there, I was playing, I was trying to play a lot of jam sessions and a lot of gigs, and I got a call from Joe Diffie. Joe Diffie actually grew up. He was a bluegrass boy, and then turned country and had lots of number ones, and I grew up listening to his stuff. And I mean, I was thrilled. I remember exactly where I was when he called. I was at the YMCA, and I did a backflip into the pool after I hung up the phone with Joe Diffie because I was so stoked. I'm like, I finally made it.
Oh yeah,
Um,
that's
and
awesome.
yeah, and I was like, I'm going on tour. This is gonna be amazing. It's gonna be this like, and it was about 6 months in for us to live in Nashville, and I was like, I did it, I did it. And over the next couple of weeks, I was working, with Joe Diffie's crew, and what I realized is that Joe went on the road and he was doing 300 shows a year, and my wife was pregnant with our first kid, and I was in the middle of a master's program, and all of a sudden and then went to a rehearsal, and it was like note for note, same songs, 300 nights a year, note for note, no questions asked, because those songs are iconic. I mean, people can whistle every fiddle break, every guitar break, every guitar lick, fiddle, all of that. They know those songs. And so, I was like, can I kind of switch the solos up? And they're like, absolutely not. I ended up passing on the gig. I passed on that gig because I I wasn't ready. I don't know, or that I realized that wasn't my dream as a musician, is to play other people's work. And some people told me, they're like, this, the fact that you got this shot this early in your Nashville career and that you're turning it down, that like you're done. You'll never play again in this town. And I said, okay. And I'm okay with that. Being stoked that I got the call was really cool. But I didn't want to go down that road, I don't think. And I don't know that I would take that gig now. I mean, Joe Diffie's passed away, and he's one of the great ones, but yeah, I don't know that I would take that gig now, even, under those same circumstances. So,
It
yeah.
reminds me, I was talking to a really very active studio drummer. This is years ago, but I asked him, I knew how successful he was, and I had listened to a bunch of different artists, and you flip the album cover over, and it's like, oh, it's that same guy. Here I am. I was playing percussion, and he was playing kit. And I said, what's it like to go in the studio every day and just get to be so creative in the studio? And he was like, oh no, my friend, no. He goes, my job is to go in the studio every day and sound like a drummer. He's like, creativity is not really part of the process. He's like, that's
Yeah. That that was probably one of the hardest parts of me moving to Nashville. Um, and so what I ended up doing, well, let me tell this. So this was right before the Joe Diffie thing. So I got a call to sub for an up and coming country artist, and I was really stoked. Man, I woodshedded so hard. I was playing fiddle and mandolin. We were playing at a club, and all like there was tons of labels and industry professionals there. This was, essentially a gig to try to get a label. This particular artist was, super nervous, beautiful voice. So I remember, going to, it was my first time I'd ever gone to like one of the big rehearsal stages. It's like a full stage, full sound, full everything. So we're there for about 8 hours with the full band. And I am just writing notes. This is pre-iPads, so I'm like writing notes, even like writing out parts that were very specific to what this artist wanted. So I'm like notating parts, and I'm like, oh, I got this thing dialed in. And that was on a Sunday. The gig was on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. So that Monday I like woodshed it at home, take more notes, and I'm ready. I'm like, dude, I got this. So we go to the club, and there's not a lot of people there because that's not what it was, right? It's just industry professionals, and like Nashville's a weird space. So the guy playing acoustic guitar, who was the band leader, is a pro fiddle player who went on the road. with all these massive country artists. And then the drummer, I met that drummer ended up going on the road with a ton of country superstars like Big and Rich and others. And so that's kind of like everybody who was there was a touring musician with a #1 country act. So we start this first song is this big fiddle kickoff, and I kick this thing off. I'm feeling really good about myself, man. I'm like, oh, I got this dialed in. The artist turns around and is like, my voice hurts. We rehearsed too long on Sunday. And I was like, well, you got this, man. You got this, you know? And I'm like Mr. Positive. And so we play a couple more songs, and fourth or fifth song into the set, the artist turns around and says, drop it a half a step. I can't
Oh,
sing it. And Keith, I froze. Like, I don't know, dropping the fiddle a half a step, I probably went ghost white because the guitar player, the band leader, turns around, he says, grab your other fiddle. And I was like, what are you talking about? I brought one fiddle, two fiddles. And he's like, oh my gosh. So a lot of times in Nashville, then fiddle players would have two fiddles, one that's tuned either a half step up or a half step down. And I didn't have it. So I was like, oh, oh, oh. And then the drummer's like, 1, 2, 3, 4, big fiddle kickoff. And I tried to just shift down a half step as best I could, completely transposing in my head in the moment. It was a train wreck. It was an absolute, I screwed it up so bad. The song got over. The artist looked at me and said, you're fired.
right
And
there.
I went, yes, ma'am. And they did another, and the band leader turned around and said, get off the stage. And I was like, okay. And I remember putting my fiddle and my mandolin. I had a fiddle mandolin custom case, and I put it in my custom case, and I grabbed my amp and my board and like kind of squoze, like behind the bass player and the drummer, and walked off the stage and walked out the door, and I put my gear in my car and I drove home. And my wife's like, why are you home so early? And I was like, I just got fired. And she's like, no, you didn't. And I was like, yeah, no, I did, in the middle of the gig.
That is amazing.
And I mean, it wrecked me. Because I I had no concept when I moved to Nashville. I didn't understand the Nashville number system. I had no concept of what was happening, in that space a little bit. And I walked in kind of thinking that I was pretty hot stuff. And it was, looking back, it was the best thing that ever happened, is getting fired on stage in front of labels, because I had to do the work. I had to sit down and learn the Nashville number system. I had to sit down and figure out what that meant. It was the first time I went, oh, this isn't about me as a fiddle player at all. The artist is in charge. And if the artist moves it down a half step, that's my job, is to support the artist. It's one of my favorite stories, because how many people get fired mid-gig and pack their gear up? But it was, I mean, I look back now and I'm like, that was the best thing that could have happened.
It's interesting because we were talking before. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is what would cause you to fire somebody mid gig? And I was not expecting that story, Drew.
Yeah,
Seriously.
that for sure. Through the years, we've hired a lot of musicians. There's certainly people that I haven't never called back again. I know there's different ideations of the law or the rule of three, but I kind of learned it in Nashville. And be a good hang, show up on time, and know your stuff. I look at that situation for me, and I definitely didn't know my stuff. And in the moment, I think it was such a high pressure moment for that young artist, who was counting on me to elevate her show. And when it was a train wreck, that was enough. I showed up on time, and I try really hard to be a good hang, but it was so catastrophic in that moment that she deserved to turn around and let me go. Like, there's no question in my mind. Like, I earned every bit of that firing. I try not to hire anybody that's not good at their craft, for sure. Like, I'm going to do my homework on them. And but man, that good hang part, you spend a lot of time in a car or a van or a bus. There's a lot of time on stage, sound checking. There's a lot of time in a green room. There's a lot of time at hotels, and if I don't wanna hang out, or somebody always wants to just, like, talk about whatever, and, man, that's hard. I don't like, that kinda kills the vibe.
Right.
That's huge for me. That's super huge for me. Probably more important than any of it because you spend so much time. I mean, if you go on a road with a band, that's like family. You spend more time than you with them than you do your wife and your kids.
That last gig that you and I played together, and we talked about it for just a minute, but like just being there with that particular group of people, the music was awesome, but the music was almost just the bonus of
Yeah.
how cool it is to be with you guys. The jokes are great, the vibe is great, everybody's a total pro. I mean, I think it means a lot to be able to, like you say, you got to enjoy the people that you're with.
I'm in a very lucky position because I made a very conscious choice. I mean, when we moved from Nashville and being a high school principal, and which I love doing, but I play because I love it. Which is interesting because I practice more and probably play more personally than I did when I was in Nashville. In Nashville, I was always working toward the next gig, and now I'm like, oh, I want to play Church Street Blues by Tony Rice, and so I'll sit down and work it out, and it's not because of a gig, it's because I love the music. So I understand the privilege of being in that space, but man, playing that particular gig with those people, it is 100% therapy for me to be with amazing human beings that I just love being around. So yeah, no, you're dead right about that.
So, given your range of experiences from when you were a really young kid through where you are today, you are at a performing arts high school. What's the advice you give to these kids that want to make a living, want to make a career out as a performer?
Yeah, that's a question. I mean, we work with kids, both of us, and it's a question I get a lot. I think the thing that I hear the most probably from parents is, excuse me, I want my child to have a backup plan, and I'm like, nah, just go. I mean, I've got a 16-year-old daughter who is a beautiful singer songwriter, and so I'm kind of like living this experience as a dad right now. And kind of the advice that I give her is you need to go to a town that where music is vibrant, and you'll have opportunities to play gigs. You'll have opportunities to succeed, and you'll have opportunities to fail, and get really comfortable failing. Just get comfortable falling on your face, because what I learned in Nashville is Nashville cats, those they can play, and it's incredible to even be invited into those circles of to play with people that are like that are that good. But I learned really quickly that most of the incredible musicians that I ever was around or got to play with, or artists, touring artists or whatever that I ever got to be around and play with, uh, every one of them suffered from imposter syndrome. Always like wondering if they were good enough or if they were going to get fired on the gig, and so that was a lesson I had to learn, and I tell that to the students all the time, like, be okay with imposter syndrome. You're going to wake up and feel like you're not good enough for this, and if you keep showing up on time and you keep being a good hang and you work on your craft every single day and you're just consistent. Greatness comes from consistency. So if you're consistent every day, one day you're going to wake up and go, "Oh my gosh, I'm on tour. I cannot believe it." So it's just that consistency. Even I tell students sometimes, man, even if it's 15 minutes a day, that's more than most people will practice a day. But if you're playing an hour every single day, you look at students now and they're spending on average 5 to 6 hours on their phones every day. Like giving up one of those hours to just play your guitar or fiddle or mandolin or drums or bass or whatever. Maybe there's 10,000, 30,000 drummers in Nashville, but I can tell you this, in the 10 years that I was there, of all the gigs that I played, it was maybe with 5 or 6,
Wow.
because those 5 or 6 got called because they rocked and they put the time in. And so I think there's a lot of people who want it, aren't really willing to do the work to get it. So, and start, start early. Like I tell the students all the time, I'm like, man, I wish that I had a school like this, that I would have had a little edge before I went to college or before we moved to Nashville, just a little bit more edge. And I feel lucky that my family played, and we got to gig a lot, and I learned a lot in those experiences and failed a lot. But so gig a lot, open mic nights, learn what's working. Does the song work with the crowd? I mean, all of those things. Just get out there and fail fast, and keep going.
Any parting shots? Anything else you want to say?
Well, I'll say this, Keith. I feel super lucky to play music. Um, you know, and kind of the older I get, the more I realize that it is truly a solve for kind of healing, right? Salve, I guess, is what I was trying to find. Like it truly is healing for the musicians themselves, but like for the audience as well. I mean, just going back to that gig that we played most recently, like, I mean, there are people in that audience that, that was what they needed at that moment. And so to me, I think of it that way, and that helps. We don't know the impact, and I think we could all go back and say, here's a moment for me in music that changed my life. Like, whether that's a teacher, whether that I mean, my first concert was Oingo Boingo, and
Nice.
it changed my life. I mean, I don't play Oingo Boingo style music, but oh my gosh, to see that people make music like that live, I was like, "Oh, I'm in." Like, or I saw Bill Monroe. I actually was like on my dad's shoulders at a bluegrass festival, and I saw Bill Monroe, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I want to do that." Like that's cool. And he was, I mean, at the time, he was pretty old. So I just feel super lucky that I get to play with cats like you, um to me, I think it's, you know, people who play instruments, it's like a calling to give back, to help kind of heal the world in whatever fashion. So,
Well, on that note, thanks so much, man. Let's do this again.
okay, sounds good, man. Thank you.
Man, what did I tell you? I hope you enjoyed this every bit as much as Drew and I did. Go ahead and click the like and subscribe buttons and leave me a comment below. Let me know what you thought. And while you're at it, make sure you're following Drew on Instagram and Spotify. All right, I've got another amazing guest lined up and another interview video coming, so I'll see you soon.